Everyone, welcome to this edition of a Raw News podcast and also a Kingsway Kickabout podcast, special edition this week. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Matt Walker, author of Europe United, a book where Matt recounts his travels across all 55 UEFA nations to watch a football game in each across the year-long period, the 2017 Summer League season and the 2017-18 Normal League season, and finished with a month to spare, particularly impressive indeed. The travels were covered in countless media across Europe, including Guardian, Football Focus, the BBC, and BT Sport in Scotland. And from someone who reads a probably unhealthy amount of sports books myself, not only was it indeed one of the best football books of 2019, ranked in the top 18 officially, but one of the most easy and enjoyable reads of any sports books I've ever read. It truly is a full and epic adventure, and for this we recommend the paperback edition, which is coming out in this May, I believe, Matt.
That's right, yeah, Alfie. Yeah, it's out on the 13th of May, just before the Euro.
Right. Or if not, you can pick up a hardcover copy of the book like this, a bit bruised and battered as all good books should be, I think.
Excellent, good to hear.
So yeah, you're doing all right, Matt? I think cooped up in London by myself, but not too bad in the, fine but not fine, as I think everyone is at the moment.
Yeah, I'm doing okay, thanks, Alfie. It's been a long time, of course, with all these restrictions, but yeah, football is still a good escape, even when it's just television.
Has your mood improved by the potential of Fulham beating Newcastle on the final day season in front of a half-full Craven Cottage to stay in the Premier League?
Well, yeah, we've just come off a 0-0 against Crystal Palace, which we dominated. So yeah, I'm a little bit less hopeful, but still 12 games left to play. So I think the key is that Fulham haven't really played badly in many games since November, December. So we're with the chance.
Matt, could you just give us a background to the idea of the travels and maybe some of the early hurdles you faced along the way?
Yeah, sure. So I came with a rather crazy idea to go to all 55 UEFA nations and watch a top division match in all of those, kind of about the end of 2015, which was about a year and a half before the actual adventure started. So there's quite a few kind of logistical challenges. The first one is that I'm not a full-time writer. I do have a job at the time working for the Ministry of Justice, so I had to try and arrange for time away from work. And you can imagine those meetings with your boss saying, oh, you'd like to apply for a career break. What are you going to do? Maybe look after some family members or do a master's or a PhD. Oh no, I'd like to travel around Europe and watch 55 countries worth of football games in one season. I always remember my boss's face when I told him that. Actually, his first response was, oh, that's going to cost you a lot of money, Matt. And actually, that's a sensible point, actually, because I had to be very careful with my budget. I'm an analyst, so I've had various spreadsheets trying to estimate how much the trip was going to cost me. It's not something you can put into Google. You can't put how much does it cost to watch 55 countries worth of football in a year, because it just doesn't exist. And there were loads of variables around things like flights and accommodation costs in particular. So I came up with a kind of an analytical model, which will probably appeal to some of your listeners more than others. That proved to be very, very successful in its predictive nature of the costs. So that was one of the big hurdles, was to get the time off work and to save up enough money to cover my travels. But then, from a more of a football perspective, there was a lot of logistics with the actual scheduling of the matches. And as you implied earlier, Alfie, there was kind of two sets of seasons. You have your summer seasons, which take place in, as the name suggests, sometime between February and September, October of each year. And then you've got your classic autumn to spring seasons, which is the majority of European nations. So I had to make sure I covered those summer leagues early on in my trip, so that I didn't miss the deadline and miss my target.
Yeah, absolutely. And so following on from that, I'm going to take a sort of semi-chronological approach to the interview and sort of tackling various facets on the way. So you started off your travels in Georgia, which was one of the more ad hoc decisions of the trip, was it not?
Yes, that's right. Georgia was one of those countries that had a summer league, but they made the shift just before I started my travel. So I was planning on visiting in the autumn alongside their neighbours, Azerbaijan and Armenia, but I had to do a rapid change of plan, and I tacked them on at the beginning of my trip, which was due to start in Scandinavia, but instead started in Georgia. And it was actually, this isn't mentioned in the book, but it was the only one of the 55 nations that I managed to do while still at work.
Yeah.
I actually used up some of my annual leave before going on my break away from work, and did Georgia over a long weekend.
Yeah, and you chose Dillagori, I should say, for your Georgian game, and maybe some of the eagle-eyed amongst you will know that Gori is the birthplace of Stalin, and I think there are a few sort of weird monuments. Was that one of the more like obscure historical pieces of your travels?
Yeah, I mean, as you'll know, the game actually got switched to Tbilisi. It was due to be held in Gori, but I went to Gori anyhow because it's not very far from Tbilisi, and also it is a bit of a bizarre place with a rather celebratory museum for Stalin, who's very well regarded in large chunks of Georgia as well. Yeah, I had a variety of, I guess. A lot of the sort of more historical places were some of the crumbling stadiums in Eastern Europe, which is certainly something I enjoy sort of traipsing around. So there was some kind of vestiges from the Soviet era in the likes of Belarus, for instance. Lots of crumbling stadiums there.
Yeah, and you followed on from that from doing a little mini Nordic leg, going to Iceland, the Faroes, and Norway. And was it a nice sort of easy bit of integration in that, you went to Reykjavik, Tórshavn, and Bergen, which are three cities which are, easy to walk around, and but with stadiums all nice and near the city centre?
Yeah, it was a nice, easy start, actually. I think that's a good way of describing it. There weren't going to be any major crowd problems in the Faroe Islands. Everybody pretty much speaks English in those three countries. Yeah, it was a nice, easy start. The one thing I had to be very careful with is my budget in those countries, because I could easily loan a large chunk of my budget by spending, I don't know, by buying something like a £30 pizza in Reykjavik, which does exist. So I had to be careful with my money. I couldn't spend too long in those countries. So it was about 3-4 days in each of those. But it was a nice start. It was a good way to get sort of on the football road.
Some of the knowledgeable amongst you might know that Vorgor Airport, the airport serving the Faroe Islands, has an extremely limited amount of destinations. Edinburgh, Billund, Copenhagen, Bergen, and Reykjavik, which were obviously the two other locations which sandwiched it. So given that, was that one of those moments where your choice of game was kind of determined by practicalities?
Yeah, very much so. I was lucky Bergen were at home.
Yeah.
So I was able to take a flight from the Faroe Islands to Bergen and go to the game at Bergen. So yeah, very much so. I mean, I would have had to detour down to probably Oslo if Bergen weren't at home that weekend. But these were some of the vagaries. I often didn't know until quite late on whether a team was going to be at home or away. And even when they were at home, like Dillagori, the match got switched anyhow. So I had to be quite flexible with those things. But the flights around, that part of Europe at that time, which was the height of summer when there's a lot of tourists traveling around, were quite expensive. So I really had to, leave it reasonably late to make my decision and go, yeah, I'm heading to Bergen for my match.
You had to make that flight in Reykjavik, that heart attack moment for you.
Yeah, that would have. I think I did estimate how much that would have cost me. It would have been a big, significant chunk of my budget had I not made that plane in Iceland. So I was fortunate there, and I think luck was on my side quite a few times throughout my
trip. So then followed a sort of mega trip, going to Sweden, Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Lithuania, all of the Baltic states, sorry, I should say, and also Finland, or rather I should say the Åland Islands, where you chose to see IFK Mariehamn. Sorry. How did you find out about such a small, quaint village kind of team in, you know, a nice picturesque Finnish island?
I do remember actually the story when they won the title just before I was out there, and they were kind of seen as the Leicester City of Finnish football, although they're not, as you just said, they're from an autonomous region of Finland that speaks Swedish actually. So it was a bit of a curiosity, and I saw the potential to go from Stockholm through the Åland Islands and then on to Estonia by ferry, and I was always trying to use as many different types of transport as possible, and that really appealed to my kind of, I don't know, slightly offbeat way of traveling and trying to. Obviously, I had to take a lot of flights, but trying to avoid planes when possible. And I do like islands. I'm a big fan of islands. I really enjoy places like the Åland Islands, Faroes, Malta, Cyprus. I enjoy having the sea nearby. So it was a lovely way to travel, and Mariehamn was a very welcoming and rather quaint place where a lot of Swedish people go on this holiday.
You spent nearly 2 weeks in Kazakhstan slightly later on. Was that, you know, due to the fact that, you know, you were conscious that you might never go out there again, as it were?
I guess it was partly that, and it was partly due to the fixtures, as it often was, where I had to wait a reasonable amount of time until the next game, which I think was Ufa in Russia. In retrospect, it was probably a bit too long, given the amount of time I spent in some of the cities in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is quite a curious place because it doesn't really see a lot of tourists.
Yeah.
And although it's actually quite cheap to be a local there, you know, the cost of public transport and local food is virtually nothing. The hotel's not that cheap, and the infrastructure is not really there for foreign tourists. So there was an interesting national park. Well, we're not here to talk about national parks, but there was an interesting national park not far away from Shymkent in southern Kazakhstan. But to get there would have cost me hundreds of pounds to hire a jeep, because there was no organised trip.
Yeah,
there's no tourists go. So it was partly due to that, but it's a curious place as well, and I like those curiosities such as Kazakhstan, which has got real influences from China, from the Middle East, from the surrounding Central Asian states as well.
If you are a religious watcher of the excellent Simon Reeve BBC documentaries, his various travel documentaries, you'll know that the Charin Gorge near Almaty in Kazakhstan is an absolute hidden gem, where I believe you went to, didn't you?
No, I don't think I got outside of Almaty. But I have watched Simon Reeve's programs, and I think it's called Meet the Stans. It was his first ever series, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know. There's actually a Simon Reeve link, although it's a bit of an obscure one, because I don't know if you remember his Turkey series where he visited the Black Sea coast. So actually, this doesn't make the book at all, because I had quite a bit of time on the Black Sea coast, and I focused most of the book on my time watching Trabzonspor. But he did take a rather bizarre homemade cable car when he was in Turkey.
I remember that, yeah.
And I took that very cable car, and it was partly because I remembered it from the Simon Reeve series from a few years before. So yeah, that was a little bit of a Simon Reeve link.
Yeah, no, that did look particularly incredible. And talking of stomach churning journeys, because the cable car is very high in the air, you said that one of your flights in Russia was particularly stomach churning. Was that, you know, the worst kind of, you know, ramshackle mode of transport you took to a game, or were there a few others?
There was quite a few minibuses around Armenia and Azerbaijan that were pretty tough, particularly as somebody who's 6'6". I mean, I'm not sure how many more decades I'll have cramming myself in the back of communal minibuses to get from A to B. But that was certainly the worst flight. I certainly didn't feel particularly well after that one. Although the worst flight I've ever taken in Europe was actually not on this trip. It was just a social trip to Zagreb when I landed in the middle of a thunderstorm, and I had lightning bolts crashing around the plane. That was a pretty horrendous trip.
No, there've been a few of them with me on flying up to Edinburgh a lot to see various family members when often the weather is quite inclement and the landings aren't the prettiest. Kind of finishing off this section with a kind of culinary aspect. In your final two countries, Belarus and Lithuania, you had two kind of polar experiences. You had some excellent beer sticks for football in Lithuania. But for some reason, the beer in Belarus was terrible, and you had to end up having a Paulaner instead.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's one of those things that you go to a foreign country, see all these fancy labels on beer, and you think, well, I'll try a few. And,
yeah.
After 3 or 4, you normally find one that's at least palatable. But everyone in Belarus was awful. It was only when I got chatting to a few locals in Vitebsk after the game, they said, "What are you doing? Drinking local beer? We don't drink it. It's awful. We drink the German stuff." But as you'll know, Lithuania's got a much nicer brewing history. Vilnius is actually a really nice place to visit for beer as well as football, and it helped that it was 27 degrees and the sun was shining, and you could have your beer in the stadium with your beer sticks and watch the football, which was 5-0 win, I recall.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a shame that my dad, a regular traveller to Belarus and Ukraine because of his work, I think you'll be the only person he's ever met apart from himself that has ever been to Vitebsk, right in eastern Belarus.
Oh, really? Okay.
Location. So yeah. And then after that, came back home, and you did both for Republic and Northern Ireland, and went to the Oval in Belfast for one of the games. It's a proper old school British ground in loyalist East Belfast. Did you enjoy? I mean, I'm fascinated by Northern Irish history myself. Did you enjoy wandering around Belfast and the various murals and black capitals and even the Titanic Museum? Was it a nice historical place to visit?
Yeah, I'd been to Belfast once before with work actually, and it was about 10 years before, and the difference was quite dramatic. Nobody visited Belfast in the 2000s really as a tourist. It was just as budget airlines were getting their legs going. But 10 years on, it was definitely a busier place. Quite a nice buzz around the city centre. I mean, the weather wasn't great, but that's always the case. And I guess when I was doing my travels, I didn't really use social media a huge amount. I used it to promote. I didn't really follow any accounts, so to speak. But I've realised since how famous the Oval is if you follow any football ground Facebook group, it appears almost on a daily basis as one of the classic grounds. And I think since I've gone, that I found out they've actually started doing sort of formal tours for groundhoppers at the Oval as well. And I wonder, because I did quite a lot of promotion of the Oval, and as you'll know, it reached one of my top 5 football stadiums, which I recounted at the end of the book. But I wonder if I had a little bit of a help there, getting even more groundhoppers visiting Glentoran and the Oval.
Yeah. And then after the September international break came a sort of Caucasian adventure. And now I'm in the really small minority of football fans in England who actually prefer international football to club football. But even then, I was shocked to learn that even the leagues in San Marino or Gibraltar, even they have they stop for every international break. So was it nice to have banker 2-week rest breaks in there for you?
When I was planning it, I was a bit irritated by the international because I was like, well, that's contingency time gone. I can't do anything. I'm going to have to come home because there's no point just hanging around somewhere for 2 weeks waiting for the next league fixture. But actually, this trip, and it doesn't even really come through the book, was incredibly exhausting because of the amount of travel and the amount of organisation and the amount of different things I threw myself into. And it was actually, in retrospect, really nice to have some periods of time when you knew there was no games that you were missing out on. I was able to come home, do some of the mundanities like washing book flights, write up some of my notes, back up my photos, and then go back onto the road, kind of refreshed. And I think I had a couple of reasonable sized breaks, about 3 weeks, around about August and then December, partly because of the international fixtures and partly because of Christmas and a lot of the leagues shutting down. And I think they were really good for me, sort of personally, health wise, keeping myself fit and ready for the road.
Absolutely. In Azerbaijan, on your way to see Gabala, I believe you're invited to a wedding. Was one of the more weird stories of your travels, weird encounters of your travels as well?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I couldn't make it because I had a game to go to, but it was a lovely yeah, it was a lovely a lovely gesture by the guy. This is one of these, and there is you never get good stories really from traveling around by air. But as soon as you go on a train or you go on a shared minibus with a load of locals, you get to meet genuine local people who want to tell tell you about their country and want to show it off. And that's exactly what happened in Azerbaijan. And I could have easily have ended up in a wedding if it wasn't for the fact I had to go and watch Kabbalah play.
Now, because of the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, you had to travel through Georgia to get into Armenia, and then after Armenia to go into Turkey through Georgia again. Was that a particularly grueling part of your travels? Going through the rolling hills of Akalsike over the Turkish border, and going back into Armenia as well.
Oh no, I love that region. It's so fascinating. It's a real mishmash of cultures. It's got so much history. The scenery is fantastic. The food's pretty good. The beer's palatable. It's cheap. It's a lovely place to visit. In fact, when I came up with the idea, I kind of looked at the regions that I hadn't been to in Europe, and the Caucasus region was one of the ones that was really high up on my list. But it wasn't really that much of an inconvenience. I think if it had come later on in the trip, say April, when I was finishing the countries, I probably would have just wanted to get it over. But because it was relatively early on in my trip, it was just countries.
Yeah.
Countries 14, 15, 16. So yeah, it was the right time.
Absolutely. And obviously you went to Trabzonspor in Turkey, if you mentioned. Were they one of the best set of fans?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm still in touch with a few of them over Facebook.
Oh, great.
Actually. Yeah, if I ever went back to Trabzonspor, it would be the same crowd of people who would take me to the games.
Have they?
Yeah, no, they're a good bunch.
Have they been in Europe since your travels? Because I'm sure if they get into the Europa League group stage, or I don't know, maybe the Conference League in the future, I'm sure you keep an eye out for any close games to join up with them again.
Yeah, definitely. There've been a couple of clubs actually who were very nice towards me, who including Maribor actually in Slovenia, who've invited me to various games. And I think Maribor played Glasgow Rangers again. They're always playing Glasgow Rangers shortly after my trip, but I couldn't make it unfortunately. But yeah, they invited me up, which was nice. But Trabzonspor, I wasn't really dealing with the clubs. It was more the fans, and they've obviously got a big group of fans in London. So yeah, I think it would be great to go and watch them in the famous red and blue stripes.
Yeah. And then your journey from Bulgaria to Serbia had a few foxholes on the bus journey between Niš and Kruševac, I believe, as you couldn't pay your bus ticket. Was that one of the bigger foxholes of your trip?
It was. Yeah, it was. I thought I'd get away with it. I mean, I didn't have any cash. But I had cash with me, but I wasn't able to change it into Serbian dinars because there wasn't anywhere to do so in Niš. It was a little bit irritating. It kind of reasserted something that I always say to people: is always have a bit of sort of universal currency, use a few US dollars because people generally accept them, even if you haven't got the local currency. But nobody really wants any Bulgarian currency in Serbia, so it didn't really help me. But it was okay. I thought I'd be able to get out of it, and I did.
Well, I'm often annoyed by perceptions that people still have of former Eastern Bloc countries and former post-Soviet countries as still a bit ramshackle. It's just like, oh yeah, you'll have a cheap holiday, but it will come at the price of living somewhere a bit dodgy, which is just not true a lot of the time, or at least in my experience. But were Moldova and Romania, and maybe Odessa in Ukraine, maybe the closest you came to somewhere quite ramshackle where you were staying?
Yeah, I'd say probably Moldova was the most ramshackle place. Actually, Odessa is a beautiful city with lots of classical architecture, even though I didn't stay in the most salubrious place. But Moldova's just it's a curious place because Chisinau has never been a capital until the Soviet Union broke up. It's not even a regional hub, to be honest. I mean, the Soviets didn't pay any attention to it. And suddenly it has been thrown into its importance, not just by being a capital of an independent country, but also on the border of, what could be the European Union. And and Russia. So it's becoming incredibly strategic, but it's a bit of a dump. I mean, nobody must go to Chisinau and think, wow, this is one of the hidden gems of Europe, because really it isn't. It's got lots of tower blocks. The main stadium, which you would have seen if you've ever watched any of the national teams. It's always on there. The yellow and green seats of the main stadium, which is where I went, which was in Brew. I mean, it's basically a poor man's Carrow Road, it's just, and the food is off the scale awful as well. I mean, there's always something about a place, I would say. I mean, I've traveled to a lot of countries, and some of them are not ones that are traditional tourist countries. And actually, in Moldova, it was the wine. The wine was very good.
Yeah.
I did a number of wine tours, and everyone goes on about the Georgian wine, but I didn't really like the traditional method of wine production they use in Georgia. But actually, the Moldovan wines, which are mainly made for the Russian market, actually were very nice. And so that was what I took out of Moldova. Really, I wouldn't say it's a classic city break contender, even when we get past COVID.
Were your I think it was in Odessa when you experienced something like chicken livers or some god awful meal. Was that your worst meal of the trip?
Yeah, I mean, you say there's a bit of a cliche about sort of Eastern Europe being ramshack, and whilst a lot of the city centres have been revamped recently, the food's not moved on massively. It's still, I ate a lot of brown food in Eastern Europe, and I found that actually one of the biggest challenges, because it was so hard to find vegetables. I wasn't self-catering because it was very cheap to eat out anyhow, but normally I'd be just eating meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
And sure, if you live in the middle of Zagreb, I'm sure you can get some nice sushi, etc. But I wasn't in such cosmopolitan places most of the time.
Yeah, I from my time in training, which is about 2 to 3 weeks. Obviously, it's the same thing when you're going through Eastern Europe and you're either eating out every night or you're getting a takeaway and you're not getting vegetables. So on a few occasions, my friends would just buy a bag of carrots from a local supermarket just to get some vegetables down them. There's a bit of respite.
I can sympathise with that.
Yeah. And you went to the Low Countries after, where I believe you got a hire car around to navigate between Ghent, Mönchengladbach, and The Hague fairly easily. Was that nice? Did you enjoy the bits of travel where you had a hire car, you weren't having to go for a flight, or you needed to make a bus at this hour? Did you enjoy the times when you got a hire car?
That's a good question. I have to say, not really, because I mean, everybody, perhaps in this post-COVID world, I'd enjoy a driving holiday a little bit more. But there's a couple of things I didn't like about hiring a car. I mean, it was the example you just gave. It was a necessity because it was actually impossible by public transport to get between the 3 games in less than 48 hours. So I had to hire a car. But I didn't like the fact that there was no chance of meeting anyone else. I mean, even on a flight, you've got a minimal chance of bumping into somebody on the plane, and there's a few stories in the book. But you've got absolutely zero chance of meeting anybody when you're just driving yourself around. Another thing is I did like to try the local beer, and if I'm driving, something that I can't do. And the third thing is kind of a practical thing, actually. I did quite research for it's just something you can't do when you're driving a car. It's not possible to research. Whilst on a train or a bus, you're able to do a bit of research on the web.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it was exacerbated by the notoriously flat and fairly boring landscape of Wallonia and northwestern Germany and the Netherlands as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Very, very boring place to drive.
Yeah. And another little Balkans leg, a nice little cluster of countries. I mean, I myself am very lucky to be quite well travelled. I'm halfway there, visiting every country in Europe, which I'm
excellent
about. So yeah,
but you're about half my age as well, which is quite appropriate.
Yeah, we'll see. But Albania was another one of your big foxholes. How did you manage to bluff your way in to the ground?
I think it is partly confidence. As long as long as you get across that you're kind of someone, which I wasn't someone. I was traveling around Europe watching football, but as long as you can refer to a news article. Fortunately, I had a Guardian article then that I actually printed out and brought along with me on a few of these things, and it actually was quite useful because they could see it was a headline in the Guardian football, and everyone knows the Guardian football is one of the best free football resources out there. But yeah, I had to be confident. I had to, be very respectful. It's one of the number one rules when you're traveling is never lose your cool, even when it could have been a really massive frustration if I wasn't able to make it into the game, which was behind closed doors due to crowd violence at a previous fixture. And I think that paid off. It was unfortunate that the game was the worst of the entire trip. So it was played behind closed doors, and really it should have been played behind closed doors because there wasn't much to say of note about the match.
What was it like visiting Corfu in the winter?
Yeah, it was a bit strange actually. There are lots of enormous restaurants with nobody in them because it's very much a tourist town. Even Corfu town, which is UNESCO World Heritage capital of the island. So it was a little bit strange. I didn't find the locals particularly friendly there. And I've subsequently visited Greece. The Peloponnese, which is a different part, and I found the locals were very friendly there. So I think it was just a case of the season. Everyone was a bit knackered and fed up with tourists, and the last thing they wanted to do was converse with me. And the weather was terrible as well, which doesn't help.
Were the epic monasteries of Meteora one of your favourite landscapes?
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, it was a bit of a detour, to be honest. It was an extra, half a day's driving to go there. After going back from Corfu to Albania and then driving into Greece, but it was really worth it. And it got absolutely fabulous weather, even though the temperatures were really, really cold. I think it was below freezing at night, but beautiful blue skies. And fantastic. Both from a cultural perspective and also for the scenery as well.
Yeah. Did you get a sense in North Macedonia and the Greek region of Macedonia that was it? Did they, were they eager to talk about, the name situation there? Is it, often a hotly contested issue like it's portrayed in the media, or is it something that people kind of, don't think about on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's a good question. I got the impression from speaking to a few people in Macedonia, as it was known. Now, of course, it's changed its name to that they were kind of more concerned with some of the Albanians and some of the issues with them than they were with Greece. I think it was kind of the Greeks find it more of an issue than the North Macedonians or Macedonians do. But there's a large ethnic Albanian population in Skopje and other parts of Macedonia, and certainly some conflicts between the Macedonians and the Albanians, and I think that's what they were more concerned about at the time. But I mean, these things change quite rapidly.
Were your games in Denmark and Poland? I mean, I've been to Helsinki in the summer, as I haven't experienced it in the winter. But yeah, were Denmark and Poland, the Helsinki, Brøndby, and Wisla Krakow games, were they the most cold of your travels? Did you struggle to keep warm during the games?
Yeah, they were definitely the ones I wasn't really looking forward to. Loving warm weather, and they were the coldest ones. I think probably Cracovia. I think was probably the coldest air temperature. But Helsingborg, because it was almost like going to a non-league ground in England, you don't get any of the warmth from the crowd there because it's quite sparse, and that felt particularly cool. I think I had quite a few drinks before the Helsingborg game. It helped make it through the match.
No, absolutely. And did for the GB leg over on Christmas and New Year, did you get the train from Inverness to Dingwall in Scotland?
Yeah, I did. I got the train one way and the bus on the way back. Just
Well, yeah,
again,
because
just 'cause I like the different
yeah,
methods of transport.
well, the Far North line, which goes from Inverness to all the way through Caithness and Sutherland, all the way to Thurso, is absolutely spectacular. It's a beautiful train journey, and I'm sure it was nice to visit a corner of the UK where which is more or less on our doorstep, where you maybe wouldn't have without the motivation of a football game.
Yeah, definitely. I was keen to go. I'd only really visited Edinburgh and Glasgow in Scotland before, and I was keen to visit somewhere that wasn't Edinburgh and Glasgow. So yeah, and I really liked the kind of seeing the most northerly team
Yeah.
in the Scottish top division, the most southerly in the English top division as well. I thought that was nice. Nice contrast, although neither are in the top division now, of course. So yeah, it was good. It gave me a motivation to go to somewhere a little bit different, and the same could be said for Wales actually, where I went to Llandudno, not a part of Wales I've ever been to before.
Israel and Cyprus in January, was that some much needed heat for you after an extremely cold December, or at least 15 degrees at a minimum to get off?
Yeah, it got up to about 20 in Israel in January.
Oh, right.
It was lovely. It was so nice to have a bit of sun on me after. I mean, normally I would be working in an office and you're not quite so exposed, but when you're going out, sightseeing and to football matches, you can get seriously cold. I had a lot of layers on a lot of these matches in
Yeah.
December and January, so it was lovely to get a bit of light. And Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are two incredible cities, just an hour apart from one another. I went with kind of, maybe a few reservations about Jerusalem would be because I love the history of that sort of part of the world. But actually, both places were fascinating in their own way.
And late January, February was your epic Mediterranean leg of the trip. Some particularly arduous journeys to Gibraltar and Andorra here, but one was from Malta to Sicily to Calabria, sort of a kind of 9th century Islamic conquest following the footsteps of journey. Was that one of your favorite journeys of the trip? Because I know you really like Mount Etna especially.
Yeah, it was really good. I found out about the famous train that goes onto the boat between Sicily and the mainland of Italy quite early on in my research, and I thought, that'd be great to be able to do. I got the ferry from Malta to Sicily as the first part of that journey, and actually it would have been cheaper if I'd taken a Ryanair flight, one of those things. But I was desperate to do it by surface, so sometimes I didn't always take the cheapest option. And sometimes you reach somewhere which is totally out of season and has some fantastic sites like Sicily, and yeah, I really enjoyed wandering around the likes of Syracuse and Catania, and of course Mount Etna. And then I had the kind of, as you'll remember from the book, I had the kind of the crazy situation of Rai Due, one of the big TV channels in Italy, wanted to accompany me on the journey. So they actually flew down from Milan, where they were based, to Sicily to join me on the train, which went across on the ferry. So that made it even more special, actually, particularly as they were a really great duo. And
that brings me on to a point. Even if you've read the book and you've maybe joined Matt's Travels slightly late, the 55 Football Nations website is still there, and it's got month by month updates of the trip, and that includes the video on Italian TV of him visiting Crotone, featuring a really good Cockney Rejects accompanying track. So it's good watching. Go see it. And speaking of out of season things, in Spain, Italy, and other places on the Med, did you manage to maybe slightly treat yourself to a fairly decent out of season hotel at a reasonable price, and the same with restaurants?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was able to get pretty good rates. I reckon probably about a third of the summer rates in most of these places. So actually, the countries which you'd think would be traditionally some of the more expensive, like the holiday countries around the Mediterranean, were pretty reasonable out of season. So yeah, I managed to stay in some nicer places than I'd visited in in the summer. So it worked out quite nicely that way. And so what? It was actually the Beast from the East hit Europe that month, February 2018, and we've just had a bit of a revisit recently, of course, with the bad weather a couple of weeks ago in certainly in South England. So it was great to be in warmer sort of southern Europe when that hit the northern European countries, and quite a few games got cancelled.
Yeah, you've read my mind with that comment there, because that would have been one of my next questions. But also, speaking of treating yourself, one of the games you saw in Spain was Sevilla against Atleti. Was that a conscious decision to think, I'm going to watch at least one really good elite game on my travels, or was it, just being in Andalusia and it was one of the games which was on?
My first game there was the Malaga game. That was the one that I wanted to see, because I did want to kind of stick with the kind of the uncelebrated teams where possible. When Sevilla Atletico Madrid popped up in the calendar, it was going to be one that I was going to be hard to ignore. And also Sevilla's an amazing city that I visited a couple of times before, so it was great to go back there. I also had it doesn't get mentioned in the book, but an English friend of mine was traveling in Spain at the same time, so we were able to meet in Seville and in Cordoba as well. So I had a little bit of company, because by that stage I'd been traveling for a lot of time, so it was quite nice to have some friendly faces when I was free for a few days.
Absolutely. A question, sorry, that has just popped into my mind, just rewinding it back to the Crotone leg of the trip. On the video, it shows some of your reactions to the Crotone's goals, etc. And you have a glass of some red substance. Was that a glass of wine at a football game, deviating from your beer norm?
Yeah, there wasn't much beer at the. We were on the VIP suite, courtesy of my television friends, and there was quite a lot of wine being passed around, and people were sort of smuggling bottles under their jackets and stuff like that. It was a very nice antipasti as well, but there wasn't much beer on offer, so I took the wine into the stand afterwards. So that was quite nice. It was another cold and wet match actually, so the wine helped me get through that one.
And obviously in that Mediterranean leg with Gibraltar and Andorra, which was your favourite microstate that you visited, do you think, overall?
Oh, favourite microstate. Yeah. Well, for the football or for the geography and the culture?
Either, because I'm sure for the football it'd be Luxembourg, right, in terms of quality.
Yeah, Luxembourg was fun. Yeah. I think, I would go for Luxembourg for football. For culture, actually, Malta is really interesting because it's got so many influences from different parts of Europe, from Britain, from Italy, from North Africa. So I think Malta's well worth visiting just from a cultural perspective.
Yeah.
The football wasn't great. To be fair, I actually saw 5 matches there, more than anywhere else. I think I deserved a medal after the last couple of games.
I think Maltese is the only language in the Latin alphabet which is a Semitic language. I think so.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very nice language to listen to actually, and you're really only going to ever hear it in Malta because there's a relatively small population. Yeah, it's a lovely language to listen to. Some words thrown in from all from North Africa, from the Middle East. Yeah, it's great.
In also March, you ticked off Czech Republic, Austria, and Slovakia all over one weekend. And for that, you went to Prague in the Czech Republic, Mödling in Austria, but which is basically urban sprawled into Vienna now. Then base yourself in Bratislava, which is obviously quite a capital city focus, which wasn't typical of your travels. Was that logistics rearing its ugly head that forced you to do that?
Yeah, it was really, because I had to cover all 3 countries in one weekend. So the 3 capitals are relatively close together, so it made a lot of sense to go to Prague, to Vienna, and then on to Bratislava, where I could reach Shalina, which was the team I saw there. I haven't been to Bratislava before, but I've been to the other 2 cities before.
Well, me and my mates had our our August bank holiday A-levels trip, we chose Bratislava because it was the cheapest flights going, and it is not a place you want to spend more than 5 days in. I will say that.
No, I've read a travel blog recently that called it something of a hidden gem, and I kind of disagree because when you've got the big hitters nearby like Budapest, like Prague, like Krakow, and Bratislava just feels
I think it's brilliant for a weekend or 3 days because you've got
a couple of days. Yeah, it's okay.
I think it's really nice then, but then beyond that, I think you run into. Were Rapid or Austria Vienna not playing that weekend or on the Saturday, I believe, where you had to go and watch the game? Did you have to go to Mödling out of logistics?
I think they were the only one in that part of Austria on that day. I think otherwise I'd have had to travel further west. But as you'll know, I then went on to Slovakia, so it was important that I stuck to the eastern side of the country. So these are the sort of logistical things I always had to think about. Sometimes there might have been a slightly more interesting fixture in another part of the country, but then if you're going 6 hours out of your way, it's costing you a lot of money and a lot of time. And also when I was thinking about the fixtures, particularly when I had these rapid turnarounds, I was always trying to integrate myself and get stories for the book and for my own enjoyment. And it was always very hard when you rocked up in a country like 4 hours before kickoff. So you wanted to try and keep the amount of time. Ideally, I like to arrive in a city the day before kickoff. That would be my perfect amount of time, because I've got time to maybe go around, have a look around the sites, maybe meet a few people in pubs, bars, supporters clubs, restaurants, and then you've got the day of the game itself.
That's definitely true. After that, a journey across Austria, which I'm particularly jealous of, given Austria I've been to the most out of any foreign country. It's one of our favourites of our family. The only state we haven't been to is the Burgenland, actually, which is just a tiny little slice of eastern marshland on the Hungarian border, which is mostly ethnically Hungarian anyway. Was that a really nice journey, on the shore of Lake Constance towards St. Gallen, despite it maybe being a touch expensive?
I don't remember it being too bad, actually. The train ticket. I think it was one of these sort of online fares, and because I was traveling on a strange day, I can't remember what day of the week it was. I think it might have been a Monday. But yeah, it was a lovely trip. Yeah, it was really enjoyable, and I hadn't taken quite as many trains as I was expecting, because a lot of the connections in Eastern Europe are also by bus, and I had to take a lot of flights to get some of the more obscure places. So yeah, I really enjoyed that long train journey. Went via Munich and then back down to St.
Gallen. Now, for those watching the YouTube edition of this, they'll be able to see that I'm in a St. Gallen jersey picked up from a hiking holiday to the Graubünden and St. Gallen. It's a lovely city, St. Gallen. Really nice university architecture, and home of the Schützengarten brewery. Did you enjoy the beer in Switzerland?
It was fine. I'd say, it didn't reach the heights of some of the other countries that I went to, but it was fine. It was quite smooth. I think certainly St. Gallen is cheaper than Zurich, so it wasn't quite so harsh on the wallet. And I did have a very good contact in Switzerland as well, in St. Gallen, who treated me to a number of things, which was very, very kind of him.
I can't quite remember which you ranked as top of the hops in the end, which was kind of like a side bit of your football travels. Was it something Germanic, or maybe something unexpected?
I think Latvia was high up. So that was one of these sort of unexpected countries. I think they use a lot of honey in their beer there, which it depends if you've got a sweet tooth or not. But I quite like sweet beers when they put a lot of sort of honey or chocolate. So yeah, that was certainly one of the better countries to visit. But yeah, I mean, Switzerland was fine with regards to the beer. But it was really the group of fans I was with throughout my time there that really made the story. So yeah, it was great. And actually, when I launched the book, which was August 2019, and I invited a number of people from my travels, more hours. I didn't really expect half of Tel Aviv to fly across for the book launch, but Bert in Switzerland flew across from St. Gallen and was the only person from outside the UK to be there at the launch, which was fantastic.
That's great. Liechtenstein, I think, is a country that interested me most during your travels. Were you delighted when FC Vaduz got relegated from the Swiss top flight into the Swiss second division, which meant that you could say 55 football leagues? Because if listeners don't know, all teams in Liechtenstein play in the Swiss football pyramid. It's the only UEFA nation without a domestic league.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually hoping they stayed up, but in retrospect, it did give me 55 leagues, which previously it would have been 54 leagues and won twice. But I was kind of hoping they stayed up because it kept the top. It was the top division. Definition would have been kept too, but it would have only been 54 leagues. So it was kind of either way. Whatever. I had to go to the highest performing team in each country, which obviously they were playing at the time in the second.
All the other teams in Liechtenstein, like Ruggel and Eschenmauer, play in the Swiss fourth or fifth tiers. So that would have been like a non-league game, definitely not part of the top flight. Part of your venture. Was your meeting with Ernst one of your favorite people you came across during your travels, or one of your best, experiences?
Yeah, Ernst is an absolute legend. I think he's fully retired now. He's been writing about Liechtenstein football for decades, but he still does it a bit in his spare time. He was very, very good to me. He was very good to Charlie Connolly when he was writing the book about Liechtenstein's grounds, which helped inspire my own challenge. And it was amazing to visit him in his house as well, up in the Highlands, overlooking Vaduz. I didn't really expect him to give me that much time, but it's a small place, it's a friendly place, and I often found the best stories came from those sort of countries. I guess the only downside about the game was it was a bit of a dead rubber at the time. Neither team were going up, and neither team were going down, which were the type of games I tried to avoid on my trip, but became unavoidable later on in the challenge.
Absolutely. Well, the final leg in April took you across various Visegrad states and the Balkans as well. Well, only one Visegrad state in Hungary, but various countries in the Balkans. And in Slovenia, but also in Hungary, where you visited Puskás Academia, who play in the Orbanite, I'm going to adopt that as a word, a village of Felkshit. And you also visited like Lake Hevish and Pech, like some really nice areas. Was that one of your most like rural journeys during your trip, given you went to see a village team there and you went through the Slovenian countryside as well?
Yeah, I think so, actually. Particularly the southern part of Hungary. I mean, I was driving around some tiny roads there, following Google Maps on my phone, and they were almost as if they hadn't been touched by the European Union. It was just it was like a throwback to. I mean, I've been to some rural parts of Romania that were quite similar, actually. It was like a throwback to 40 or 50 years ago, with just a row of houses along a little street in the middle of nowhere. It was quite enjoyable, actually. The weather was turning at that time. It was quite pleasant. I was obviously in my last trip of about 5 or 6 countries, and it was a good place to end the trip. And obviously I threw in Budapest, which was kind of the last major city on my trip as well.
Absolutely. And was the Pantro Arena one of your favorite stadiums? It's another bucket list stadium for many football.
I mean, phenomenal. I mean, I would go back again because I was there for a day kickoff, but I would love to see it at night as well, where it would look fantastic. It'd be almost like a kind of a magical wood in the middle of nowhere. I got into some trouble there about taking pictures of Orban's parking spot outside. I was a bit lucky to get away with that. It took an enormous amount. I didn't include in the book because these sort of things are quite tedious, but it took me an enormous amount of negotiation to get my camera into that stadium. I mean, it was email after email between various people in Hungary to finally get the approvals. I was glad I was able to, because it was absolutely stunning inside.
Are they quite on it with people taking photos on their phones, or did you really want it with your high definition camera?
Most countries don't care about your phone, to be honest. I'm not sure I saw any problems with that. It was mainly trying to get my my DSLR in, which is, it's quite a chunky camera, particularly with the 300mm zoom on. But I guess, when I was starting out on this whole adventure, I was always more of a photographer than I was a writer at the beginning. And I think perhaps now I'm more of a writer than a photographer. It's the way things work. But I was very keen to document everything with as high spec photos as possible. And a lot of them are up on the website, and of course some of them got used for the book as well, which was great. But I think perhaps if I could change a few things, I maybe would have gone a bit cooler on the photos and focused really on the experience even more. And that maybe would have saved me, sort of some of these conversations about cameras.
Well, unfortunately only about 10 or 11 photos make it into the book, but again, on the website there's about 10-15 photos for each country you went to, and they're all great, especially, as you said, some of the ones from your Caucasian countries are really spectacular, of the landscapes. And wouldn't rule out Pushkash Academia being in Europe in the near future either.
Yeah, looking good. Second place at the moment, I gather.
Yeah. They've got the backing, definitely, to say the least. And then finished off in Montenegro. I think that's a really brilliant choice as your final country. It'll definitely be belting hot in late April, lovely Adriatic coast. Fairly obscure football. And was it really nice to meet up with your mates? I think came to visit you.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, about a dozen or so friends came out to Montenegro at the end, which was, given it's not the most accessible of places, it was fantastic. A few people tagged on to the extra holidays in Croatia as well. Obviously, the game was always going to be awful.
Yeah.
Because it's the last match, and you've experienced, some real thrillers, 8-1s, 9-0s, 5-2s, and it was a 1-0 the last match. And I was quite glad at least it wasn't goalless, because I didn't have too many goalless matches on my travels. But yeah, it was a lovely end to the trip. I guess Montenegro was never really going to be about the country so much. It was more going to be about the end of the conclusion and how I felt about the whole trip, having gone through it all and finally finished it with round about. I think I had about 3 or 4 weeks contingency left.
I think along with the LFF stadium in Vilnius, which I believe you went to, the Stadion Pod Gorichum is the other, in Podgorica is the other stadium in Europe where I'm sure England fans are pretty sick of visiting by now, Stadica in Ljubljana too. I think, I can't remember if it's Mladost or Buduknost, but I think one of them is rebranded as Titagrad now, and it's called just a bit of a stir, if I'm not correct.
That's right, yes, it has had a rebrand. I think it's Mladost have changed their name now. So yeah, some of these things go around in circles though. We were quite familiar in England with teams pretty much holding their names forever, but it doesn't work that way in other countries. They get rebranded every 3 or 4 years.
From a perhaps selfish perspective, were you quite happy that Fulham's mega run toward the end of the 17-18 season didn't quite get them into the automatics, and it meant that you managed to get to see them get promoted in the playoffs at the end of the day?
Well, I managed to make that game at Birmingham, which if we'd won and other results had stayed the same, would have been automatic. So
yeah,
it was special for the book to end it at Wembley, with my dad watching, for the very first time watching my team play at the National Stadium, winning. So yeah, it was a special end to the trip. I would have preferred automatic promotion, but yeah, I think it was a nice conclusion for the book, and then afterwards there was a bit of a epilogue at the World Cup as well.
Was it Derby who you had in the playoff semi? Did you manage to get to that as well?
Yeah, I went to the semi as well. So that's perhaps something I wouldn't have been able to do had I been working, but because I wasn't working, I was able to take the Fulham bus up from Stevenage Road to Derby and back again.
Just to finish off the chat with some general questions.
Sure.
No, some of them get to the book, but Did you have any like really like bizarre moments during the game? So either like a massive brawl on the pitch, or a completely fluke goal, or you know, like a ref getting injured, or you know, anything like that.
I mean, there was a huge punch up in Republic of Ireland. It was kind of a real kind of like,
Yeah.
I think it was the first real beef I think I saw in the whole trip, and because it was in Bray Wanderers, so it was a very small ground. So somehow it feels a lot more insane when you know the crowd are just 5 yards behind the goal. So that was
Yeah.
quite fun.
Was the goal that the goalkeeper scored for Krumkachi in Belarus like the most incredible thing you've ever seen?
Yeah, I have gone on about this goal quite a few times, and I think
Yeah.
some people have heard the story a number of times. But it was a great one for the book because nothing really that spectacular had happened until I hit Belarus and the goalkeeper scored from his own penalty area, which is not something I've seen in any live game before.
I know.
But there was also a fantastic chip in one of the Cyprus games I saw well against AEK Larnaca. That was from just about the halfway line. So I did get to see two incredibly spectacular goals. I don't think either of them were flukes. Well, I think the goalkeeper one was a fluke, but the chip certainly wasn't.
And did you have any locations where, you know, they weren't, you know, the ones you were most looking forward to, perhaps, you know, maybe a fairly average location on paper, but really surprised you and, you know, you really enjoyed in the end?
I think Luxembourg was a place which I think we mentioned it earlier. I mean, it was my favourite of the micro states, and actually, like Luxembourg City, which I hadn't been to before, is quite a neat capital. But the standard of football was actually better than I was expecting. I mean, it's quite hard to compare to the English system, but I mean, you know, Progress Niederkorn and Dudelange, the other team that I saw, both had reasonable results in Europe recently, and the national team's been carefully improving as well for such a small country. So I'd say both for the location and for the football, I think Luxembourg exceeded my admittedly quite low expectations. It was also one of those countries that went around on my schedule 3 or 4 different places depending on when they moved the fixtures. So it was one of those that was becoming more and more irritating. I finally managed to tick it off, I think, at number 50.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't even rule them out qualifying for Euros, given they're now in League C, and you know the Nations League playoffs are now a thing. Unfortunately, they've also succumbed to a Lego stadium, as I like to call them, as their new national stadium, which is just a bit useless and boring for me. But you know that is.
So I'd say Luxembourg was definitely a place. And actually, I mean, I don't want to go too much about the British countries because they're obviously far more familiar, you know, and countries and Wales and the islands, because it wasn't really what my trip was about. And
yeah. And just to finish off, it's obviously a book about traveling as well as football fundamentally. So what was your favorite journey, do you think, to a game?
Well, my favorite journey to a game, it's quite a tricky one, because normally I was within range, so to speak, of of the match. I think the San Marino one was bonkers, because I ended up walking for about an hour down a mountainside to actually reach the stadium. It was actually quite hard to find as well, which you'd think in a tiny country it would be easy to find the stadiums, but San Marino is quite mountainous.
Yeah.
And Google Maps is best in places like San Marino. I think I was just relieved to make it to the stadium there, because I was getting quite a low country count. It would have been very awkward if I had managed to get to a game, and it was also a very late kickoff as well, to remember, after 9 o'clock. So yeah, I think that was just relief more than I think it would have been quite a picturesque journey had it not been dark.
Yeah, I think like you, I would have backed myself to get onto the pitch if I was able to, as well in San Marino, given the definitely probably the worst quality of football your travels.
Oh, so yeah. I mean, yeah. Even in Andorra, you've got players who used to play in some of the.
Well, thank you very much, Matt Walker, for giving up your time. And so the paperback edition is out. Remind me of the date in May?
It's out on the 13th of May.
13th of May. So do get it on Amazon, or if you're a good egg, Blackwell's and Waterston's, or an independent as well. Or if you don't fancy paperback, the hardbook cover is still available in many a location. Do help yourself, and also just peruse the website as well, because I have definitely spent a few like 15-20 minute periods just scrolling through the photos and videos, where his interview with Football Focus, and a really nice video actually, which BT Sport in Scotland did in the new year as well, is also up there. So do go and watch that, and thank you very much for listening all, and thank you to Matt again.